Hello and shalom, brothers and sisters in Messiah Yahushua. Welcome back. I'm Jeremy, and this is Megalithic Egypt, where we're going to talk about the world before the flood. I want to keep these videos short. If you haven't already seen Millennial Day 2 or the Megalithic Millennium videos, I know they're a little bit longer, but that goes through kind of more of the teaching that I give for many of these megalithic sites around the world and how I believe that they are pre-flood and the biblical evidence for that. I'll show you a couple of scriptures at the end of the video. I won't read through them. I'll just post them on the screen and you can read through them later. That gives some support for some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in these videos. So again, I want to keep them short, but what we're going to do is we're going to go to all these places, and there's thousands of them around the world. I'll probably post on this series maybe every other week, and I'm going to keep them really short. So with that said, let's get started. Alright, so before there was a flood, there was a megalithic world, and the evidence shows that all of these sites were pre-flood, the megalithic sites. Alright, so in Genesis 6:5 it says, "And you saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." Remember, in the garden, God created us to only know good. We didn't know evil, though evil was created by God, and God knew evil. We weren't supposed to know it. And so when we ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, our mind was open to knowing these spiritual things of evil, but we also knew the spiritual things of good. But later, mankind just turned to only having evil in his heart continually. Such things as hate and anger and lust and greed and evil and wicked thoughts, instead of having love for his brother and kindness and joy and peace and patience. They had all gone very dark. Alright, so with that, let's look at the evidence from the flood. So here's a picture of Egypt, of the Cairo Plateau area, and you can see Cairo in the background up there, but you can see that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of pyramids that are either still standing, halfway standing, demolished, halfway built, all over Egypt, and we're going to look at some of these. But what you want to see here is that it's not just blowing sand that's buried these things. They were buried by sand and debris and rock and rubble, and we'll see that, which gives evidence for a worldwide flood, and not just the desert blowing sand and over a couple of hundred years burying these, because these are all thousands of years old. Alright, so here's a picture of, I believe it's Osiris sarcophagus, or that's what they're calling it. I just wanted to show you here that when they found it, you can see it's buried and on its side. Okay, I don't know how accurate these pictures are, but I found them. I thought I'd throw them in there. But here you see some older pictures of how deep some of these things that they've found in Egypt are buried, and it's not by sand, it's by debris and rock and rubble. And we'll take a better look at this picture here in just a second. But you can see some stuff to the left and to the right, and they're out of place, like they've been moved and then buried, which a worldwide flood would do. Alright, so if we look at the picture on the left, it's the same picture, but you can see that these were buried not just by blowing sand, but there's rock and debris and rubble that has buried these over time, and very deep. Okay, and off to the right, again, just more pictures of things buried. Like I said, we're going to go through these fast, so you can pause and take a look at all these pictures and stuff if you want, but I want to move through them quick. Alright, more stuff buried to the left and more stuff buried to the right. And again, not just sand and not somebody burying them, but some sort of a catastrophe that moved them out of their place, shook them, broke them, and buried them. And again, more. Sorry, this picture's not as clear, but let's get into some older pictures. And so here you can see many of these places they call either temples or tombs. We don't know what they were. That's the simple fact, and they don't know how they built them, why they built them, nor who built them. Or the majority of these megalithic sites around the world will claim that, oh, they were built 100 years ago by this person, because there's evidence of that person being there. But all the evidence actually shows that after the flood, the people found these cities, inhabited them, saw what was written on the walls and developed a religion or a worship of that person in these cities. And we'll see some of the scriptural evidence for that here at the end. All right, so again, buried. And you can see the size of some of these columns and how deep that they're buried, and we're going to see some that are even bigger. But you can also see that there is stuff at the top of this thing. I believe there's some of these have mud brick still on them. We'll talk about the mud brick here in a little bit, because they have mud brick that's on top of the megalithic stuff and on top of the debris. All right, here's some more megalithic. And this one, just for size, we'll look at how big this actually is here in a minute. But you can see how deep and buried it is, again, by rock and sand, debris, and it's also a cataclysm. So you can see parts of this that were destroyed but then buried, or destroyed and buried at the same time. Because some people might say that, well, they came in and there was war and they destroyed it. Okay, but that would be laid on top of the rubble. But if the rubble and the debris from the flood has covered this destruction, then there must have been something that shook the earth that caused this stuff to fall down and then get buried. But here's these two gentlemen you can see, and this is just a little bit later picture as they started to dig it up. So more is revealed here, but you can see the size comparison. Okay, and then here you can see the guy sitting there in the middle to the right, and you can see, there's a picture of a statue, half broken to the right, if you can see it in the right corner, and then the debris that's burying this place. And then here, you can see this statue. To the bottom right, you'll see another regular size statue, and the size of these columns and how large they actually are. These ones are very large in size, and you can see the debris and how buried it is. And we're going to look at some of these places, how they've uncovered them, but the before and afters of the time that it takes to uncover this stuff. All right, and again here, cataclysm, you can see whatever destroyed this place. I mean, it's completely buried and destroyed. And over time, they've since pulled many of these things away. And if you ever go to Egypt, there's thousands of these places all over, and you can go to them and they're still laying buried and broken. Many of them, such as like Petra, they'll just tell you that there's like 80-something% that's still buried. That's even on National Geographic. And the cost to uncover it is just so monumental. But they're going to tell you that it was a localized flood that buried it. And same thing with many of these things. It was a localized flood, or the Nile, or what have you. But they're not going to tell you that what the Bible actually says is true, that there was a worldwide flood because the thoughts and imaginations of the hearts of men were evil continually. And that the Bible tells us that the destruction that happened in Noah's day is going to happen again, only next time not by water but by fire. All right, again, here you can see they're trying to dig it up and remove the debris and rubble. And there's a picture of some of these temples and pyramids that are just along that area of northern of Egypt, of northern Africa there. So some of these are still buried, and they're uncovering them every day. All right, and just more pictures of buried stuff. Here's more pictures of buried stuff from, not just sand, but also over time, things, overgrowth, have grown and buried them. All right, and you can see as they're starting to pull some of these things out, the size of them. And they're just sitting there buried. Farmers will be digging in their land, and they'll hit something, and they'll try to dig it up, and then they're like, oh, look at what I found. And this is the case. We'll look at some of the stuff in India. It cracks me up that the stuff that's buried there that you never hear about. And so we'll look at India in some of these videos as well. All right, and again, here you have them pulling these things out and the size of them. And you can see that they're buried, and they have to be dug up. That's why they call them archaeological digs. And we find them. They're not hundreds of years old. They're thousands of years old. They were buried by a worldwide flood. And there's another sarcophagus, that's a wooden one, though, to the left, and you can see it's buried by sand. But also, if you look to the right, this is just above Abu Rawash in Egypt, on a military installation. It's just a deep, carved, like line into the earth. It's not a stairway. They've made it into a stairway, but you can see that these are all over. This is the start. I don't know if they started with these to building the pyramids, the descending or ascending passages, or if they started with the big square holes, which we're going to see here in a minute, because some of them you'll find there's square holes there, and some of them you'll find that there's these lines there, and then some of them we'll find that there's the line into a square hole, and then the pyramids go over top of those. So through Egypt, you find every level of a pyramid being built, from the start till the finish, and then finished ones destroyed. What caused all that, and why were so many left unfinished? Well, my thought and my belief, my horse in the race, is that it was a worldwide flood that the Bible says happened because the thoughts and imaginations of hearts of men were evil continually. All right, moving on. So here's those big holes, and this one I took outside of Saqqara, and down at the bottom it looks like a giant sarcophagus, kind of. We'll look at some of the sarcophagus later, but they don't look like this. This one's bigger. This one looks more like what's underneath the causeway on the Giza Plateau, which Osiris's shaft, which you can now go into. They used to say that it didn't exist, and there's the water that's underneath there, the little lake, and some of the sarcophagus. But the one at the very bottom, I think, kind of looks similar to this. This is now filled with trash. I went again just recently, and people have thrown a bunch of trash and stuff in there. But these are so much bigger than you can imagine, and the ones that are left open on the Giza Plateau are even bigger, and they're even deeper. But they're all over. And then here's more pictures of being buried stuff in Egypt. More buried Egypt. And again, more buried. You can see how high up these statues are covered all the way up to their shoulders, and back then they hadn't even started pulling that stuff away. And then here you have these two statues that were destroyed, but you can see how buried they are. That stuff, that debris and that rubble, they didn't have dump trucks and backhoes and dozers to move it, so that's why it took so long, and there was so much of Egypt just left like this, because it's too much work to remove all that rubble. And so when all these megalithic sites are built and carved, all this rubble is left behind as well. Where did it go? Where did it all go? People don't really understand or look at that when they carved all these megalithic sites around the world, what did they do with the rubble? Because we don't see it. What did they use it for? And you can see here evidence of the flood, and the flood leaves all this destruction behind. And it was left, the destruction, the evidence is there for thousands of years, because it's way too much of a task to remove it. And if you've seen my Megalithic Millennium teaching, or the Millennial Day 2, I can't remember which one I talk about it in, but our megalithic site that we built, Mount Rushmore, right, it's only 60 feet high. The rubble that from the carving of it, they just left it at the base because the amount of money, time, effort that it would take to remove it was too large. But all these thousands of megalithic sites around the world, the archaeological teams and stuff would have you believe that they were only created 100 years ago. Well, what did they do with all the rubble? Because here in Egypt, it's evident that to remove it is too much of a task, and so they just left it. But at the sites that were cut, what did they do with the rubble? Anyway, okay, I'll get off that and move forward. So let's look at this same picture. There's 1865, how it was buried, and we saw what it looked like. And now, to 2012, there's that picture down below of after they've removed it. Okay, but if you look closely, you can see what's around those. You can see this debris that's covered them, right? It's not just sand, it's debris and destruction. And then here at the Sphinx, same thing. You see the sand had laid over top of the Sphinx and the whole area of the Giza Plateau. But you can see that hot sand and being wet over time, it basically almost cooked that rock of the Sphinx. So you can see that the head was exposed the whole time, but the body was always left buried and got cooked over time. And we see evidence of that too in Petra later when we go look in Jordan at Petra, and the monastery, or all the way at the top of the mountain, 1,000 feet up, it was buried too and has the same destruction pattern. And just a better look of that, you can see what the sand did to it, and you can see how deep that rubble is that buried that thing. And what you're not seeing in this picture is the whole city that's still buried in this picture, but we'll look later how it's all uncovered now. But it took them over 100 years to completely unbury this thing. All right, and there's another picture of before they started digging it up, but you can see at this point they've also removed a lot of the rubble because it was all the way up to its head. And then more of them, pictures of the Sphinx being dug up, but here you can see none of the temple, you can see none of the city that's back behind the Sphinx. It's all still buried. Same thing here, you don't see the temple that's on the Giza Plateau, nor do you see the city that's buried under the Giza Plateau. And it's not just blowing sand, it's rubble and debris. Another picture as they started digging it up. And then another picture, and then here's another one of those lines that we talked about in the earth, and then a great big square hole. You find those again all over Egypt, right into the bedrock. All right, this is just a picture pointing out where the Sphinx is, and you saw the size comparison in the wall of dirt that was buried in the city off to the left there was buried as well, and the temple down below that was buried as well. I know this is a bad picture, but just as I found this one on the internet, made it easy so you can see where these things are. But here's a picture of that temple that was up front. You can see the bedrock was dug down, and then these megalithic stones were laid. For what purpose, nobody knows. They'll give you all kinds of ideas, but nobody knows. These stones are just like we find all over the earth, megalithic and polygonal masonry, and fit together so tight that we can't even fathom how they did it. And same temple there, polygonal masonry, not just in Peru, but it's all over, Italy, you name it. These construction techniques were all over the world, and they are pre-flood. And so here's a better picture of now what it looks like. And all those pictures we just saw, all of this stuff was buried, not just by sand, but by rubble and debris. And this is, as they started digging up the Sphinx, this is what they found buried under there. And then you can still see pictures that show that there's still much of the Giza area that's buried today, the one to the left. And then some of the things they've found, buried, and they don't know what many of these items were ever used for. There's no evidence of what they were used for, and it's a complete guess. All right, so real quick, the megalithic stone and the mud brick. The picture to the left is mud brick, and you can see that it has the straw in it. And this is what the Israelites were using to build with. They didn't use stone. It says that they made mud with straw, right? Mud brick with straw. And that's what you see they used. And then also at the time of the Tower of Babel, it says that they used brick for stone. The stone, though, I'll show you this, some of the scriptures at the end, was used before the flood. And after the flood, mud brick. And you can see the picture to the right. You have debris and rubble. You have mud brick on top of it. And then you have some stone on top of the mud brick that's more like Roman era. But if you look to the right of the picture to the right, you see those megalithic stones. You see the debris that pushes up against the megalithic stone and debris on top of it. Well, that debris had to be laid down next to that megalithic stone to cover the megalithic stone, and then the mud brick placed on top of it. And then later, those Roman era or modern era stones placed on top of the mud brick. So here you have to have megalithic stone, then the debris comes, then the mud brick, then the stones on top of the mud brick, which gives evidence to the Bible. Before the flood, they built with stone. After the flood, they built with mud brick, and then the Romans came in later and placed stuff on that, and then even modern time, we placed stuff on it as well and tried to fix some of these things. So there, that's what the evidence shows. Okay, you've got megalithic stone, debris, mud brick, then and then more sophisticated stone, but nothing like the megalithic. All right, moving on. So here's a megalithic stone structure, and you can see it's buried as well. And if you look on top, you can see there's also mud brick on top of the megalithic stone, and also other debris, because that mud brick over time decays away, right? So you have to differentiate between, is it mud brick that they built on top of the megalithic sites, or is it the debris? But either way, the mud brick and the debris came after the megalithic stone. All right, moving on. And not only that, we find cities under the water right outside of Alexandria, Egypt. They found megalithic city with many things buried, and they would say that, oh, the tide got higher or whatnot. But if you've watched the Megalithic Millennium video, I talk about how in 2nd Ezra it says that before the flood, that the earth was 86% land and only 14% water. And my belief is the where was the water? Well, most of it was up in the atmosphere. And now we have 70% water and only 30% land. So that means that there's more water covering civilizations around the earth. And we have LiDAR and stuff that will scan the ocean floors, and they see evidence of areas marked out that are like a city. All right, so some of those sarcophagus that I talked about, this is the one to the left is from Saqqara, and there's many of these. They were all found empty. And we see here to the right a picture of one that's not completely finished, and it was buried, but you can see it's buried by boulders, sand, debris, and not just blowing sand. But what a lot of people don't know, maybe you've seen these pictures. This is in Alexandria, Egypt. They were building inside of an apartment complex area, and they were digging down, and you can see how deep down the people are down there. And it's mud and rocks and debris, but what was buried down there was one of these sarcophagus. And how many more are around it, they don't know, because there's all the buildings on top of it. They'd have to destroy them to find it, to look around. But they found this one sealed still, and they thought they were going to find gold and all these treasures in it. But when they opened it up, they found 3 skeletons, and 2 men and a woman, and one had a hole in his head. However that got there, I don't know. Was he killed by it? I don't know. But I just found it interesting. 2 men and a woman, and one of them had a deadly wound to the head. Anyway, moving on. It was buried, and there's many of these sarcophagus all around that we find, and some of them with the protuberances or protrusions on them that we find all over the world, in Cusco, in Italy, and in Israel, and all over. So similar design. Also in Egypt, I'm just going to hit on this. They have this tree of life thing, and I find if this, which I believe it is pre-flood, there's a lot of carving about this tree that we see all over. And not only here, but we find the same idea in Samaria and also other places of the world, this idea of this tree. And so the story of Adam and Eve during this time would have been very prevalent, and they would have talked about this tree of life and why they were in the situation that they were. But you see them all over the world, and I just picked the ones that we find in Egypt, and this is only a few. They're all over Egypt as well. And then again, I know I've showed this before, but I find it interesting that you have this big, really tall guy, giant, sort of say, and he's holding the hair of these 3 men, right? And either whatever's going on here, I don't know. But I found it interesting that in the book of Enoch, right, in the prophecy of the animals, when it's referring to Noah's sons, he refers to them as cows. And that the three sons, one was white, one was red, and one was black. And here you have these three people, one's white, one's red, and one's black. Anyway, I found that interesting, and do with it what you like, but moving on. All right, so in Genesis it says that the flood happened in the 600th year of Noah's life in the second month on the 17th day. It says on that day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were open, because there was water in the atmosphere and there was water also under the earth. But the evidence shows if the fountains of the great deep broke open, like the Bible says, then there should be scars left behind from that break. And not only were those scars broke, but there should be evidence that water flowed out of them in one direction and pushed the sand and the rock and the debris and everything to create continents like we have today. I know people talk about Pangea and the continents shifted, but when you look at the ocean floor, that's not what the story says. The story tells from my elementary eyes that water from these scars that are in the center of the continents pushed to the left and right the sand and the debris to carve our continents, and pushed it all out. And that's what we see flowing water would do. And so the evidence for me, I can see that in this picture. I didn't make this. There are many things out there about these ocean floors, and this is also where the majority of the volcanoes are. And so if one day they burst forth with water and blew water out of them, well, the Bible says that the next is going to be by fire. And people are talking about how some of these volcanoes are starting to burp and become agitated, and even the one in Yellowstone and some of these mega volcanoes around the earth. Anyway, moving forward. I believe the flood happened a certain way. In Matthew it says that the days of Noah shall, so as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. Enoch says that that Noah saw that the earth had tilted and that its destruction was near. So whether you believe Enoch's scripture or not, whoever wrote it thousands of years ago, because we now know that Enoch, the book, is over 2,000 years old, and one of the oldest copies, I think, is about almost 2,500 years old. Whoever wrote it just told us that the flood happened because of the tilt, or the earth letting down on one side. And so if that's what caused it, we went from 14% water and 86% land, 35% oxygen. We know we had 35%, not by the Bible or biblical books, but by the sap ambers that we found and tested the air bubbles. There was 35% oxygen in them. So we went from that, and then after the flood, now we have 70% water that covers the earth, and only 30% land, and only 21% oxygen. And most of the water that before the flood was in the atmosphere is now on the earth. And so I believe that what caused that was a tilt, and that tilt was probably something that's going to happen again, is my belief. And so as the earth is on its 23.5 degree tilt as it rotates, right, the Bible tells us that the moon will be turned to blood. And then also as it's rotating, you see it's supposed to go into night, but if it tilts as it's rotating, it doesn't stop rotating, and now you're going into morning, but the earth is upside down. You wouldn't know it in the daytime until you get to the stars at night, and then the stars would be upside down. They'd look different, and you'd go, wait a minute, what happened? But the sun would kind of stay where it's at to us, or it would do a little dance. If the rotation and tilt happened at the same speed, then the sun would just kind of stay up in the atmosphere for quite some time, and you'd go, well, boy, it's been noon for a long time. Is that thing ever going to set? But it would also cause a lot of catastrophe. So some of those verses, I'm just going to get through these real quick. In Psalms 82:5, it talks about the earth being shaken. In Job 9:6, that the earth will move out of her place. In Daniel 2:20, it says the name of God, that he changes the times. and the seasons. But then also in Daniel 7:25, it's talking about the son of perdition, that he will think to change the times and seasons. So two differences there. One thinks that he's going to change them. One actually does. And so when Yeshua returns, in the Epistle of Barnabas, says that when Yeshua returns, the sun coming again, that he will change the sun, the moon, and the stars. And I believe it's through the tilt of the earth, and the times change. We get more oxygen, more land, more trees, and people live to be longer, up to 1,000 years. Isaiah 13:13 says that the earth shall be removed out of her place. Isaiah 24:20 says the earth will rule to and fro like a drunkard and be removed. And again it says it shall fall and not rise again. And then in Amos 8:9 it says that in that day he will cause the sun to go down at noon, and he will darken the earth in clear day. So when it's supposed to be daytime, it's going to be dark, and when it's in Zechariah, we'll see when it's supposed to be evening and dark, it now becomes morning. In Isaiah 24:1, it says that he turns the earth upside down. And I know some translations will say he makes the earth bare, but if you look at all these verses, something's happening to the earth. It's shaking, it's moving. I believe it's tilting upside down. And in Zechariah, here's where it says that at evening it shall be light, because when it's evening time, the next thing that comes is nighttime and darkness. But here it's saying, no, at evening, instead of it being darkness, it's going to be light. And so if the earth tilts, and it starts right at the time of evening for some people, well, as it's tilting and rotating, once it finishes, now it'll be morning for you, and you don't go into the night, you go into another day. And so just like Joshua's long day, we see in Joshua 10:13, it says the sun stood still and the moon stayed. Okay, and then it goes on to tell us, it refers us in Joshua. I believe that this is the sign of the Son of Man, Joshua's long day, because Joshua is the name for Yeshua. It's Yeshua in Hebrew. But Joshua refers us to the book of Jasher, and when you go to the book of Jasher, it gives this long song about Messiah and his return and his rule. And then it goes on to say this, the sun and the moon stood still in heaven. So is this a prophecy of what the sign of the Son of Man is? I believe so. So right now we are, because of the flood, at 70% water that surrounds the whole earth and 30% land. I don't think anybody really contests that. But as 2nd Ezra says before the flood, that it was 14% water and 86% land. And I believe, where was the other water? It was up in the atmosphere and also under the earth, until the fountains of the great deep broke open and the windows of heaven. The fountains of the great deep broke up and the windows of heaven were open and all the water came down. And now the water goes back up into the atmosphere as the clouds, but only not as much. So I believe that we will go back to 14% water and 86% land, or maybe not those exact numbers. And then because we have more land, we have more trees, we produce more oxygen, people live longer, like the book of Jubilees says. Except for those people that rule and reign with Yeshua in their resurrected body, they will live for eternity. And here in Jubilees is where it says they built with stone, and Adam's house fell, or sorry, not Adam, but Cain's house fell on him, and it was stone. And it says because he killed with stone, he was killed by stone, and his house was made from stone. And then also in Jubilees it says that Canaan learned the writing that was written on these walls, and he went to seek for himself, and he seized a city. So he found a city that was already built. It was left over by the destruction from the flood, and this is what we see worldwide. Many of these places after Babel, the Tower of Babel, their languages were changed and they spread out. And they found these places, these cities that were already built, and they inhabited them and lived there. And they found what was written on the walls, and they developed a worship and a religious system based off of that. Their worship and religious systems didn't build them, they found them, and they built their religious system based off of what they found and saw. And that is also why many of these megalithic sites around the world, the people that live there, they cannot read what's written on the walls. And it wasn't until the Rosetta Stone that we learned Egyptian, and it took years and years and years for them to learn the Mayan. And there's still languages out there that are written on the wall that the people that have lived there, They have no idea what it says. Why? Because they found these cities that were destroyed by the flood, and they went and lived there, and they don't know what it says. And so here also it says that the carvings that they found written on the walls and on the rock, that it was from the teaching of the watchers, right? So the watchers or the angels taught them this information that they weren't supposed to. But the book of Enoch tells us that information that those watchers knew was worthless, that they had not yet been revealed the good mysteries. But the Bible tells us that no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no eye has imagined the things that God has planned for those that love Him, and they will receive that true knowledge, that knowledge of those things of good and love and the eternal things that we can't even fathom, that the Bible says we're going to know. All right, so finishing up here, I think next time we might go over to Mexico. And so people have heard about Chichen Itza. You've seen the pictures, that bottom right there, the pyramid. But what you don't know is what it looked like before they unburied it, because it was buried. If you see the top right there, the picture from 1892, how buried Chichen Itza was. And it wasn't, some might say, well, that's just overgrowth. Okay, I'll give you that. But if you look at the picture over here to the right, you'll see the pyramid, and you'll see that the debris and rubble that they have started carving away, that there's so much more to this place than what they had thought previously. But it's all buried by debris and rubble. And this is the case at many sites, even Petra at the treasury. At the base of the stairs, they started digging down and they found there's much more to it than they thought. Same thing here, but it's been laid buried for thousands of years. All right, so in 2 Peter 3:5 it says, "For this they willingly are ignorant, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water," right? Because the earth is still in the water, but then it's also standing out of the water. They want to say that it all drifted. No, it's all one mass. But the water surrounded it at one point until the waters went up into the atmosphere, and then the dry land appeared. Anyway, it goes on to say, whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water, right? It completely surrounded the earth in a ball of water again, perished. The earth, everything in it died because of the flood, except for those in the ark. And so it says that the evidence is all there, and we see it everywhere. But we have our so-called scientists and everything that want to tell us that, oh no, these places are only a couple of 100 years old. No, they're thousands of years old, and they were buried by a worldwide flood. So with that said, we'll finish up and leave you with the blessing. Again, like I said, that these videos, I want to keep them much shorter, even shorter than this. So I'm going to leave a lot of the scriptures out, and we're just going to go and look at the pictures of the evidence. And does the evidence show what the Bible says? And I believe it does. It's not what we're being told. Our Christian brothers have said in the past that these things are not evidence, and we haven't looked at them as evidence, but they are. They're evidence for the Bible, and it's being taken over now because people are starting to see that these are older than they are, and you're getting all these ancient aliens and all these other things, and not looking at what these ancient books such as the Bible or Enoch or Jubilees and stuff say, because we want to hold to a narrative that and not say, okay, well, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we were wrong and the Bible was right the whole time. And so hopefully that's my prayer, is that these short videos about megalithic sites help you to get into the Bible and read for yourself what God says in His instructions for our lives while we have to deal with evil and the good to come, the eternity to come. So with that, Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His face upon you and give you peace. Shalom, brothers and sisters in Messiah Yeshua. Until next time.